Certainly, but we had been following the since 2017. You see, when you put an item, like bailout costs, even as a footnote, it has to be financed. And so we have been monitoring the financing section, how those off-budget items were being financed. Unless it was being done, outside the BOG, which has a consolidated fund, and then unless Ministry of Finance was not reporting, the sources from which we got money to finance the deficit, then you show clearly, you see clearly, something, happening there. So even though often the deficit was done in alignment with financing, you could see BOG as part of the financing of government, commercial banks, who buy our bonds, which is used to finance the sovereign bond and others. So when we started monitoring that, we realized that BOG was gradually increasing its financing of government.
And at what point in time did you realize that BOG has started financing?
Even though we had been talking about this for some time, what
Well, I think that there's okay. Yeah. We'll get Honorable back because it looks like we're getting some feedback from his end. We'll call him back and continue our conversation on the issue. He was giving us a history of where it all started, and we'll get him back shortly and have that conversation with him. It's 19 minutes past 9 here in the studios of Radio Gold 90.5 FM. Honorable has joined us. Honorable.
Yes, sorry. The point I was making is that even though we had been monitoring, the issue came up strongly, around the time of COVID. In fact, it came out when the IMF published its Article 4, in 2019, and it showed that Ghana was experiencing significant financing gap. In fact, Article 4 showed, I think, something 3 to 5% of GDP, was a financing gap. And if that was to be taken away, then somebody had to be financing it. Now, in fact, what happened at the time was that we were also doing heavily the sovereign bond, and others. But the gap was there, and this is what we kept saying, that, look, there is a gap already. You remember the Article 4 was published in November, whilst we were reading the budget, and we pointed it out. Then, as we would say, fortune would have it, COVID struck, or misfortune would have it, COVID struck in 2020. And then the government applied for the RCF, that is the Rapid Credit Facility, or what we commonly call COVID loan. Now, when you look at the COVID loan report, the table was repeated. That table was repeated, but in comparison with so we did a comparison with the Article 4, which was published at the time. And so we came to the realization that Bank of Ghana financing was going to be part of the whole show in terms of financing the. And if you remember, there was a gap, when the. There was. Yeah, I'm getting a bit distracted. If you remember, there was a gap, when the COVID report was published, and despite the financing, we could see clearly, that there was significant activity taking place in terms of BOG financing. Then, fast forward, the MPC, and let me read from the article. Preliminary assessments show that the financing gap that was estimated at the time of applying for the IMF RCF, that's the COVID loan, in March 2020, has widened significantly, resulting in a large residual financing gap. You will recall that when the IMF came, they were going to apply for the program. It said that there was a pre-existing, gap. So it became clear in March 2020 from the MPC, Bank of Ghana MPC report. Now, the MPC report went on to say that current market conditions in the wake of the pandemic will not allow the financing of the gap from domestic debt capital markets without significantly increasing interest rates. So our exit from the external markets and even domestic debt markets, which is the reason we are having the haircuts and other things, was predicted in that MPC statement. So we kept following it, quite close. And I quoted this. It's after the article is 3 series. That there was another article in BNFT. That's what I'm quoting. Quite apart from what it's part of what it were 3 series, not just one. So we're following closely. Then the NPC came again and said today, under BOG's asset purchase program, the bank has purchased a COVID relief bond with a face value of 5.5 billion at the monetary policy rate with a 10-year tenor, that's period of repayment. Those are what are being written off now, and a moratorium of 2 years for both principal and interest, which means the Bank of Ghana was not even going to receive interest from the government. And then it says, the bank stands ready to continue with its APP, that is Asset Purchase Program, which is a tool that was used during the global financial crisis by the advanced countries, up to 10 billion Ghana cedis, in line with the COVID estimates of the financing gap from the COVID-19 pandemic. So let's put it together one by one. First, a gap was identified by the IMF in Article 4. Second, COVID struck. We were among the first countries to apply for COVID loan. The report shows that World Bank and others also came, which we have been estimating to be about 6 billion, plus the bond that was done that year of 2 billion, about 8 billion US dollars. So if you see all these monies flowing into the economy, what is the justification for Bank of Ghana coming in? It explains that there's a bigger gap, either there's a bigger gap to be financed in the budget, which is not explicit, and therefore there was some financing taking place. If you remember, His Excellency Mahama mentioned that there appears to be a lot of off-budget financing, taking place. So we were then questioning, how come BOG has started financing government to this extent? Fast forward again, by 2020, by the time the 2022, budget and provisional actual was released, we pointed out that BOG was financing the government heavily, and that almost the entire, if you take 44 billion or 40 billion with a deficit of 37, then BOG was financing the government to the extent of the full, deficit. And then so we pointed out in that article that in our view, even the COVID was an event that had arisen, which was unforeseen. And therefore, the minister should have gone to Parliament with a supplementary budget, because that's the meaning of a supplementary budget. Yet no supplementary budget was presented. So, in short, what we are seeing today, just if you see what I've been saying, quoting, I have the tables. Unfortunately, we couldn't, display. But if you see the gap calculated by the IMF, and BOG financing was there. In fact, BOG, let me see if BOG, for example, it said that defer interest due on BOG. That was one of the measures which, the government was proposing to the IMF at the time. Others included lower the stabilization fund from 300 million to 100 million. It has still 100 million. Despite all these inflows coming in, the cap has not been removed. So as we speak now, virtually no money is flowing into the stabilization fund. And then there was a domestic bonds that were to be issued for 19 billion.
Ghana's goal.
So if you see all of this and a rollovers of 3.4 billion, so if you see all of this, you will see a budget that is under heavy pressure despite the heavy doses that were coming in from outside and from BOG itself. So one is not surprised, at the balance sheet of the BOG being seriously depleted. And if I may just end on this note, we had warned, if you see, let me see, in one of the articles, that it could lead to BOG's balance sheet being impaired, which is exactly what has happened, now.
And I was coming to read you that point you made about the BOG balance sheet. But before I go there, are you suggesting that from the data that was presented by government in 2020 and from the money that was coming in, at the time, if you look at the data compared to the money coming in, the BOG did not even need to give government the money it gave to government?
In our view, if what BOG had been, if what government of Ghana itself had been telling us, that the economy was sound, we were doing extensive contraction. If you remember, deficits were supposed to be at 3.7, 4.5, 5.8, which we pointed out should be around 7.5%, which Article 4, 2019, revised. The fund revised, those deficits, including the bailout and others. But the government did not pay heed. They were just telling us that they were doing well. So I'm saying that if the true picture had been painted, we would have known. But from what government itself was presenting to us, if we have to take our government on face value, then there was no need for BOG to come in. Because let me give you another. If you take 6 billion, at today's exchange rate, you are talking about 60 billion. So if you go backwards, even at lower exchange rates, today's 6 billion is virtually what GRA is bringing in as a country. If you look at, the GRA is bringing something, around 70 billion or so, a whole total tax revenue. So if you are getting that significant amount, even let's say half of what GRA flowing in, and we were doing well, then that money should have been sufficient and BOG should not have come in, because otherwise, then what we were saying, that the offsets and other things that are being done was going to harm us. Let me give you another example. Let me give our audience another example. The budget had been showing arrears around 2.53 billion, 1.5, for almost the duration up to 2020. In the 2022, suddenly it is revised to 14 billion. And we had pointed out when the arrears report was published that arrears was pipeline contracts were 77 billion, right? An amount of 23 billion was paid, out of which 53 billion was left. And yet the budget was showing just about 3 billion. The revision was down to 14. There were offsets that were made. In the 2022 budget, which we pointed out. And so if you see even the enormity of arrears, which is not passing through the budget, but is sitting there, even if you took it that 1/3 of that 53 billion, let's say even 1/3 or even a quarter, of the 53 billion was outstanding, then we are talking about 12, 13, 15 billion and not the 3 billion or so. So it's just that all of these things has caught up with us. And that is why, otherwise, with all this, why would we even default? The money coming in could have paid at least interest on the loans, both the domestic and the external. So it means there was something seriously wrong and something seriously going on. And because we felt confident talking about it now, because, and I think research has thrown it out, that we had said this already, which is why we're talking about
it. Because there are a couple of things you're saying. You're saying if the government's picture that it was painting was correct, they did not need a BOG funding. And you then talk about even the arrears figure they gave subsequently. Are you suggesting that from what you saw subsequently, government was not painting the right picture at the time?
No, we have said that several times. We have been saying that. Remember, we have been talking about the bailout, which was being put in memo. We have been questioning how was it being financed. There was news and information, breaking out that some of the contractors who were owed, despite ESLA, excuse me, despite ESLA that was collateralized, were being given bonds instead of being paid cash, from ESLA. ESLA did not cover only energy. There was an enhanced, road levy. IPPs were not being paid. So the point I'm making is, one, if, yes, as you said, the picture painted was right, and secondly, which is what you left out, we were getting an injection of about 6 billion or more for COVID, when we had disclosed to the fund that the COVID gap, on account of COVID alone, the fund was careful to separate the gap due to COVID from the deficit which we ourselves had incurred, which we needed to finance. So if we are paid, if it is true, and the government differed from the fund, then we wouldn't have needed, Bank of Ghana coming in, because the flows that we got, about 6 billion is enough to cover the 3% of GDP, which is the estimated cost of COVID.
Now, that is for 2020. And that you have an issue with the intervention of Bank of Ghana at the time. Now, subsequently, because now we are looking at the Bank of Ghana's own report, and they are talking about writing off something over 40 billion. That is going off completely.
Yes, that is all these loans. All these loans that were being given are now virtually, plus the old loans, which we are started refinancing with the Bank of Ghana, and all that. They are, their balance sheet. Governments always borrow from the balance sheet. That's why we have the 5%. Yes, that's what I was referring to.
How did you move from?
And those are the loans. Those are the loans that are being written off now.
I was coming to how we move from, because if your issue was with 5.5 billion and let's say 10 billion, and now we're looking at writing over 40 billion.
Well, mind you, we have a supervisor sitting now in the fund, from the fund at the Bank of Ghana. We are in a program and we have to be making full disclosure. When you're in the program, you have to make full disclosure of this, so that you won't get the money. And so the chickens are just coming home to roost. That's what it means. So things that were not obvious, or things that were coded in some of the statements which I was reading, which you have to have managed before, that you can see, which the general public cannot see, are the ones that are coming out. And that is mind you, it's not just Bank of Ghana write-off. The bonds that were issued were financing government. The bonds that were issued, which is receiving haircuts domestically. The sovereign bonds that were issued to finance the deficit. So what is the volume of deficit that all these amounts which are facing haircuts and things and are being renegotiated was financing? And is it, therefore, does it reflect the reality of what was being presented to Parliament? Let me say, in fairness and in balance, that the governor, and it's no justification, but I just want to point out, and so that because we need to be balanced. The governor, I believe, in the 2020 or 2021 annual bankers board that is done annually, of which the governor, and it's done by all the banks. The banks have a board with the central bank being, the guest, the governor being the guest of honor, and the deputies and whatever. In that speech, the governor warned that the extent to which, borrowing from the bank was excessive. That is, government was borrowing was excessive. If you can pull out that statement, you will see from it. Then again, the deputy governor, one of the deputy governors, I believe it is the first deputy governor, made a similar warning when he presented a lecture in Legon. Then on a third occasion, and I was invited and I attended because I teach in Lagos. In fact, governor even didn't know I was in the audience because I didn't go, up. One again, during that alumni lecture, that the fiscal deficit was posing a threat, to the stability of the country and to the bank itself. So I would say that maybe it wasn't loud enough, and I have said that this is the reason why the bank probably, and I separate independence from accountability. And in respecting its independence, I thought that on point of accountability, they should have gone to Parliament when the Speaker invited, if you remember, the governor and to come. Yet they sent a lengthy legal statement about their independence and all that, and they wouldn't even appear. Mind you, in advanced countries, the Fed chairman, the US equivalent of a governor, in the UK, the chairman of the Bank of England and others, they go to their parliaments, quarterly and half yearly, annually, to give accounts. And in our constitution, it does not completely debar Bank of Ghana from going to parliament, because remember, in the constitution and in the Public Financial Management Act, it requires the bank to go and account for foreign exchange, which had been doing, which means that the constitution recognizes the independence, but there's certain accountability. But it doesn't go the full hog as happens in other countries to give a full accounting. So, for example, just as the government's accounts, once it is prepared, goes to the Public Accounts Committee, the Bank of Ghana annual report we are talking about now should have also gone to, Finance Committee or Finance Committee and Public Accounts Committee. So while it's separating accountability from independence, and I think that also provides a buffer, for the central bank's independence, because now a more superior body, which is Parliament, is there, to scrutinize these things. And I say this because I recall when we were doing the Bank of Ghana, we were revising the Bank of Ghana Act at Okosombo. We had, and I say it to the credit, that we had, members from the opposition, the late Honorable, now late Honorable Akutu say, and some others which I wouldn't want to be, mentioning, names now, were seriously in support of our stance that as a developing country, at least the 5% should be retained and it shouldn't be made zero rating. So it shouldn't be made a zero financing. Sorry, I was talking VAT. So I think that this comes out with a larger issue, about the need for us. We are very good at MPC statements, scrutinizing in the media and everything, where even debt numbers come out, usually, not from the Ministry of Finance. So now, there was a background to all this, and the short answer is that yes, one government was able to do zero financing with one oil field, for example, and now we are in a situation where with 3 oil fields, we have defaulted. Bank of Ghana's balance sheet has been impaired, and even citizens are being asked, to make a heavy sacrifice in terms of their, savings, which they are put into bonds, including pensions.
Well, if you just joined us, we're having a conversation on about Seth Terkper, who is former Minister for Finance, speaking to us about questions he started raising in 2020 about where the Bank of Ghana was going and how that was going to affect the Bank of Ghana itself. I'm guessing from your observations of, because at some point, people within your party, including the minority, were raising issues about what they suspect. They said the Bank of Ghana was printing money and virtually handing it to government. I think that's what you said, the loans that were advanced to government. I'm guessing they are two the same thing.
No, yes, one is the same thing, but remember what happens is that Bank of Ghana starts financing government from its own resources. Remember, Bank of Ghana generates income. And in that time, it is part of those incomes and the rest that was used to put up, for example, the Bank of Ghana Hospital, put up, the University of Ghana auditorium where economic matters are, So those are from the bank's own resources. And the bank by virtue of charging interest on loans it gives to banks and to government, generates its own resources. So the financing ideally should come from its own resources. Now, then, as a depository for government's consolidated fund and whatever, it grants overheads, overdrafts and the rest to government. All of these are supposed to be within 5%. You come to the point of printing currency only when the Bank of Ghana has depleted, its own resources, has depleted the nation's reserves. That is, it means that the Ministry of Finance keeps going, and taking out the consolidated fund. When we say that interest and compensation alone is taking all the revenue, that is what it means, because the money is kept in Bank of Ghana. And so when that account begins to go into an overdraft, then that is when pressure is put on central banks to print currency. And that is when you have, no doubt, things like inflation that is happening. So it is something that happens steadily. And in the article, the third series, we said BOG's balance sheet strong, and we put strong, in quotes.
Yes.
And we said the COVID-19 fiscal support of about 30 to 55% of the 2020 budget deficit, and others to the private banking sectors will weigh on Bank of Ghana's balance sheet. We said this in that article, the article we are quoting. And we said that the deferrals, that is of interest and the rest, principal repayment, will also deprive it, that's Bank of Ghana, of valuable incomes, and in both cases, adding to domestic public debt with deferred, servicing of principal and interest. BOG's 5.5 billion loan, possibly to go up to 10 billion, which it went to GOG, has a moratorium of 2 years, which means that there was no payment, of interest and principal. So government had already started defaulting on BOG. And this is the article we wrote way back. And these were things we were piecing together from MPC, from IMF and the rest, and putting it together. Obviously, we also, as a position, were interested in what was going on. And so we said these add to the deferrals of interest on old BOG debt of 1.222 million, approved by Parliament. Right, because Parliament had already in the ledger, in the budget, approved, the financing, which is supposed to be within the 5%, on top of, all these additional measures, and then in the end, they had to declare the emergency powers, of the governor, which goes beyond. That's the first, what we call the first level. The second level is emergency powers, which come in only when it's critical. What kind of emergency? It's an emergency created by the government.
So we had 1.2.
Let me just read this that. So we said in that article that BOG's financing implies that it has a heavy balance sheet to withstand the weight of these fiscal and monetary interventions.
In order for BOG to be able to finance, cautiously. You're saying that
because balance sheet, exactly. So if it goes beyond its own balance sheet, its own resources, that's when it starts printing. And we said that it needs to tread cautiously, since most depositors' liabilities are also on the same balance sheet.
So at the time when the accession of printing was coming in, it means they had already gotten to where you were warning they should not get to.
Yeah, absolutely, and beyond. Because I was hoping that we wouldn't get to that point, and drawing attention to the fact that government should stop, using the bank, to finance the deficit, and rather cut expenditure and do other things as we normally do, just as we did, in stopping, the school, projects and other things, when crude oil prices fell, and we realized that we couldn't finance, and we managed to do a 6.1% of GDP, deficit in an election year, which they distorted. Then the distorted said it was 10.3, 8.3, and in the end, in a sooner, His Excellency President Akufo-Addo was compelled to admit, before even the minister, that the deficit was indeed 6.1 or 6.3, depending on whether but by then the damage had been done. The MDC had been, a record had been made. with that distortion, which took account of, pipeline contracts and things that were compiling to manage them properly.
So from a 1.22 billion debt, we've jumped all the way. Now we're even writing off. Did you anticipate it was going to be this bad?
No, not in my wildest dreams, because mind you, we have quite a lot of experienced people in the NPP. We shouldn't make it look like there are no experienced people, and so we could have come to this point. I don't know. I'm not in the NPP machinery, so I cannot, know what was actually going on. But I'm saying that if we had done, yes, the NDC and the PNDC had done the largest number of reforms and austerity. And these are the signs, which come up during normally crises like the global financial crisis, COVID, and others, that you then go to the IMF as the lender of last resort for developing countries. So the signs were clear. And mind you, the governors have a lot of experience. And so when they started talking, I think we should have also listened.
Now, if you read the governor's statement, the thing that was said by the BOG is we are not a commercial bank. Even though we are writing off this much, we're suffering these losses. It should not affect the work we are supposed to do. How does that sound to you?
It's affecting the work they're supposed to do. It's affecting, let me tell you, because deposits, BOG should be concerned about the financial sector. And if pensioners, pension funds, individuals and others put their money in the financial sector, including some of it in the banks, and then government borrows those monies, right? Government borrows those monies, and the government cannot pay. And government is giving a haircut. And in addition to the haircut, is saying, I can only pay you in 10 years. I'm not the one taking the decision as a saver. And that is weakening the banking sector. It's weakening confidence in the banking sector. If BOG is financing, in addition to IMF and others, has brought us to a point where we cannot borrow from outside to finance the budget, but we are financing it through T-bills only. And it is crowding out, government is crowding out even business, and the interest rates are high. How can that not affect the economy? And how can BOG be aloof? No. So I disagree with that statement completely. It's affecting the economy already. Otherwise we didn't be in an IMF program. And it's affecting more specifically the banking sector, of which BOG has oversight. And I made a statement recently that, we should, this is the second time we are being complacent. If you look at the BOG latest statement, I believe the latest, it says that, comparing, what the balance sheet of advanced countries like Japan and, other, I'm sure if it's that statement, you can read it. And I'm saying that, remember, we did the same thing when our debt was rising, and inching to 100. The Minister of Finance said, there are countries, which borrow about 100% and they are able to survive. Yes, these are advanced countries. The US just suffered a downgrade, but it was from AAA to AA plus, right? We are C. So how do we even compare ourselves, with the US or with the UK? Their bonds are still, selling at rates which are, even with the Fed increase, the US 10-year bond is around 3% or 4% compared to we issuing even T-bills. And we are not really able to issue bonds anymore. But so I think those type of comparisons, are complacent. And I think we should be, as they say, monkeys move by sizes. And so we should be comparing ourselves to the BOSTWANAs and others who are doing well, far better, than, and that is where we should have been with 3 oil fields and natural resources, yes.
And I was coming to that because you said it was going to affect and it's affecting the banking sector. Explain to us how.
Okay, maybe I was fast. I'll give one example. I'm saying that you, Senna, and myself, if we have money, which we do not need immediately, we put it in a savings account. If we are not going to withdraw that money from the savings account immediately, maybe we are putting it there so that the next semester will pay school fees. Then we'll go and tell the bank, can you put the money in the savings account, in a treasury bill, so that I can earn more interest than what you are giving me on the account. We know this interest on savings is low, right? Once you invest in treasury bills, you are giving money to government. Once you invest in bonds, you are giving money to treasury bills. Secondly, and I'm using real examples of things that are happening now. If I put my pension, the lump sum, which I receive, because there are two parts. I have a lump sum, which I can opt for, and then I have the one that comes in annually. And I see myself not working for the next 15, 20 years, God willing. Then I put the money in bonds, government bonds. Right. Previously, it was only interest and bank deposits. Until 2015, when we put the government bonds on the stock exchange, that's how they became tradable or marketable. It was the Mahama administration that, did that initiative so that, citizens can have an avenue, of any income. But remember, in doing that, we immediately set up the sinking fund to take off some of the old bonds, including even the Kufuor bond. It's essentially Kufuor's, first sovereign bond. We left the 550 million. We used 350 million, approximately 336, to pay down, that loan. And then NDP used 200 million, which we are left in the sinking fund, to pay it off, and we refinance the 200 million, with a bond. That is what we call the World Bank bond in 2015. So back to what I'm saying, citizens invest in these government bonds. And in fact, we started floating. We took a decision, the first decision, to float our sovereign bonds on the Ghana Stock Exchange. So there are Ghanaian companies and Ghanaian individuals who bought that bond. It's not just foreigners who bought it. So we were building up the domestic, market. That's what we mean by deepening the domestic market. We had no residents who were buying it. Now, if the citizens go and buy those bonds, and today, through their banks, because you can't go, individuals cannot go and buy. You can buy it through your pension funds. Even the pension funds sometimes have to take it there. They can go and buy. Your banks can buy on your behalf. So if today we are giving a haircut, to those, savings that, citizens made, and we are deferring interest and the principal repayment, how can you say that, one, it does not affect the banking sector, and two, citizens are not impacted by what is going on? And how can they have confidence in the banking system? That's where we are today. That's what I was trying to. I hope that the explanation, is better for your audience.
Yes. And then in the wake of that, the demand from the minority and from your party is that there should be consequences. They are going after the governor of the Bank of Ghana and his deputies, asking them to resign in the spirit of what you said about the accountability. Do you agree?
Yeah, but I also spoke about independence. So that decision lies with the board, it lies with the government, it lies with, the officials as individuals, and so, so that is why, it's maybe appropriate, for our side, to make those demands, just as other demands are made. But it's up to, the executives, and the individuals to take that decision.
Then there are also questions about, because you said when you got to this point, 2016, the Bank of Ghana did not give you a penny because that was the demand that was made. You had to make cuts. The Bank of Ghana is in a situation where it's losing over 60 billion, and then people are looking at the kind of expenditures they are making, and then looking at the fact that they are constructing a new headquarters and are raising issues. Are those issues germane and justified?
Well, in authority, every arm of government, ministries, when I say that When I say that we did cuts, it affects the education sector, right? Because the e-schools was, you think the minister for education will be very happy with the flagship, projects, being stopped? Do you think that, the energy minister will be happy with certain projects we are not able to borrow again and all that? But that is the essence of austerity. But if we are to keep faith with the IMF program, if we are to keep faith with the IMF program, then the IMF is imposing those conditions now. And the IMF is saying that the Bank of Ghana should not be financing government. And so you can see the supplementary statement. If you look at the appendix, BOG financing has come to zero, including even the SDR that was supposed to be dispersed this year. So if we don't do these things on our own, there's no way we can win ourselves, of the IMF. And it's a discipline which is required of us. So that is the point. Unfortunately, politics sometimes distorts these things with allegations of non-performance, and we end up in this situation.
And you've complained about that discipline. The discipline is, do you see a semblance of that discipline now? Because now things are hard for the average Ghanaian. Are you seeing discipline on the part of government? You just raised the issues with the Bank of Ghana and every other state agency that's supposed to at least be making cuts and be making sacrifices.
It started a long time ago, the lack of fiscal discipline. And we have been talking about this for His Excellency has been talking about it. Our minority in Parliament has been talking about it. Some of us outside Parliament have been talking about it. And let me give you again examples. If you do offsets, financial engineering, if you put, every government from J.J. Rawlings, government, when we had divestiture research and divestiture expenditure, we're showing it in the budget, but as exceptional expenditure. Every government, the Kufuor administration, remember, received HIPIC, revenues. There were some costs and things. They were shown. The revenue was shown. Show me where in the current administration's budget we can see the full cost of SDR and COVID loan that went into the budget. They are put into financing as if the money is coming from Bank of Ghana. The money has to flow in first, and it has to be showed. It was shown. The HIPIC and MDR were showed, in the Kufuor budgets, in the senior ministers' budgets, in Barry Reduced budgets, Akoto Sen's budgets. They were shown. Until 2013, they were shown in Dr. Dufour's budgets. Until 2013, when they became a trickle, and we declared that it was so no longer significant. Whatever was coming in will be added to the safety net provisions that government itself made until it dried up. Now, another government comes, and what do? They show the ESLA, which is revenue, as revenue flowing in. They don't show COVID and others. And then they put the cost of the ESLA, which is the bailout cost, which should have been paid with the ESLA, in a footnote as expenditure. So this is what we talk. When we talk about fiscal discipline, is the ability to raise revenue. It is your ability to curtail expenditure, and therefore, then that will give you, at least it will reduce. It will give you a surplus, but it will reduce your borrowing, and therefore impact the debt. This is what we mean by fiscal discipline. Is these four things, revenue, expenditure, borrowing, and debt, and they are linked. And if you are not careful and you don't handle this well, then you are going to be borrowing excessively, and you are going to put pressure on central bank, to finance you. And mind you, another culture which was broken is that usually when we do IMF programs, virtually none of that money, the 3 billion, equivalent of the 3 billion today, or the COVID loan, the SDR, usually the governments in the past, despite their need for expenditure, would rather give that money to BOG to strengthen, because they are forex, to strengthen our reserves. And BOG will use it to manage imports and the rest. But then the condition is that, for example, we said that, fine, if you are going to be giving this money, you take this money, and you are going to be, making some income on it, then pay the interest, pay the principal. And so BOG was the one that was paying. Today, with this balance sheet, do you think BOG will be able to pay even this, etc.? BOG's exposure to the IMF itself, because the IMF frequently supports, is very high. and it's in the IMF program, tables.
Well, we have to end it here. Our time is way up. But your successor said we have turned the corner. Do you agree?
Well, I disagreed already on the one, so I think the question is moot, and I have no reason to reverse myself. Yeah, it's premature. Yes, I don't disagree that even the sentiment around we going to the IMF board and the rest, probably brought some improvements to the economy, but shortly after we have look at inflation rate, look at growth rates where it's supposed to be landing. So no, I don't think we turn the corner, at all. And so we could do a follow-up,
Yes.
if your audience sending questions and the rest, and then we can answer some more specific questions. But this is something that should have been, that was known. I wouldn't even say foreseen. It's the MPC statements and the rest. You could see a lot of the pressure that was put on BOG.
Well, Honorable, thank you. Thank you very much for speaking to us.
Yeah, you're most welcome.
Honorable Seth Terkper is Someone Finance Minister joining us on the Gold Money Conversation this morning. DJ Kofi is taking up